I used to believe the worst kind of silence was the one that came after an argument. The sharp, stinging kind that left the air full of unsaid words. But that was before I learned what real silence sounded like. The kind that fills a house where something terrible has just happened. The kind that hums low in your chest, warning you that if you move too loudly, you might wake the monster still hiding in the shadows. The mansion was too quiet that night. Even the air felt heavy, like it knew something I didn't. I remember the way my sneakers squeaked faintly against the marble as I stepped into the grand foyer, my mop bucket rattling against the tiles. The place smelled faintly of smoke and something metallic underneath the scent of cleaning supplies, like pennies, sharp and wrong. I'd been sent here as a last-minute replacement, the kind of job that came with no questions asked and cash paid under the table. The company called me an independent contractor. I called myself desperate. The moment I crossed that threshold, I knew I shouldn't have been there. The lights were dim, just enough to show off the kind of wealth that makes you feel small, the kind of wealth you can't even imagine earning in a lifetime of hard work. Crystal chandeliers, expensive rugs, paintings that probably cost more than my apartment building. But underneath all that beauty, there was something else. A wrongness, a pulse. And then I saw it. A dark, sticky trail across the edge of the white marble, just beside the stairs. At first I thought it was spilled wine, a clumsy mistake from some rich guest after a party. But when I knelt down and touched it, the red smeared across my glove was too thick, too real, too alive. My breath caught somewhere in my throat. It was blood, fresh, still tacky under my fingertips. That was the moment everything in my life shifted. The moment I realized I was standing in the aftermath of something violent, something deliberate, something dangerous. I should have left right then. I should have turned around, thrown my gloves in the bucket, and walked out the door. But survival had taught me to keep my head down and my mouth shut, even when my instincts screamed. You don't run from trouble. You clean it up and pretend you never saw it. That's how you survive when the world isn't built for people like you. I told myself that as I mopped up the blood. Each stroke of the mop was a whisper of panic against the marble. My hands shook, my heart pounded, but I kept going. Because if someone had bled this much, then someone else had made it happen. And people who made that kind of mess didn't take kindly to witnesses. That's when I heard him. A low, deep voice from somewhere behind me. Quiet but commanding. Stop. Just that. One word. But it froze me in place as if my body recognized danger before my mind caught up. I turned slowly, the mop slipping from my hand and clattering against the floor. He stood in the doorway, like a shadow made of flesh. Tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who didn't need to speak loudly to be heard. His dark suit was perfectly pressed, his tie loosened just enough to make it look intentional. His face was unreadable, carved in cold precision, but his eyes, those eyes, were fire and ice tangled together, watching me with an intensity that made the air disappear from the room. I didn't know his name then, but something in me already understood he was someone people feared, someone powerful, someone dangerous. I opened my mouth, tried to explain, tried to find a reason that made sense for why I was on my knees scrubbing blood from his floor. But all that came out was a tremor of words I didn't recognize as my own. I was told to clean. The company... He stepped closer, slow, deliberate, until I could see the faint bruise at his jawline, the edge of something dark, dried blood maybe, just beneath his cuff. His cologne was subtle, expensive, intoxicating, and it made my head spin because no man who smelled that good should also make you this afraid. "Who sent you?" he asked, his voice smooth but dangerous, like the blade of a knife tracing the edge of your skin without breaking it. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "The agency. They said the usual girl called out sick. I didn't mean to." He cut me off with a look, the kind that silences you not because it's rude, but because it's absolute. You shouldn't be here. I know, I whispered, and I meant it more than anything. He studied me for what felt like an eternity, his gaze slow, assessing, like he was peeling back layers I didn't even know I had. I felt exposed under it, like he could see every bad choice I'd ever made, every secret I'd ever buried. Then, without warning, he crouched beside me, picked up my discarded glove, and looked down at the faint smear of blood on the marble. When he spoke again, his tone was quieter, almost thoughtful. You didn't see anything. Understand? I nodded, because what else could I do? He straightened, brushed invisible dust from his sleeve, and said something that would haunt me long after that night. You clean well? Keep doing it. Come back tomorrow. I didn't understand. Not then. But something in his voice made me realize this wasn't an offer. It was a command. He turned and walked away without another glance, disappearing into the hallway like smoke dissolving into the dark. I sat there, heart pounding, my knees aching against the hard floor, staring at the clean patch of marble where the blood had been. And I wondered what kind of man could sound like danger and safety all at once. Later, as I packed up my supplies and stepped outside into the cold night, I saw his car waiting at the end of the drive, a sleek black machine that looked more like a threat than transportation. He stood beside it, talking quietly to another man. When his eyes flicked toward me, even from that distance, I felt the weight of them, as if he'd tied invisible strings around my wrists and was testing how far I could walk before I'd be pulled back. I should have known that night that my life was no longer my own, that once a man like him notices you, there's no escaping his orbit. You can pretend you're invisible. You can tell yourself you're just a cleaner, a nobody, a name on a list. But deep down, you already belong to the world he rules, the world that stains you long before you ever touch the blood. I went home shaking. I locked the door twice, sat on the floor of my tiny kitchen, and tried to breathe. My phone buzzed once, an unknown number, a single message. Tomorrow, 8 p.m., same place. No name, no explanation, just inevitability. I stared at that message for a long time, knowing I should ignore it, delete it, forget it ever came. But something about that man's eyes, that voice, that impossible mix of power and pain, wouldn't let me. And that was how it began. The story of how a cleaning job turned into something I could never walk away from. Because I didn't know it yet. But the man whose blood I'd wiped from the marble floor that night was the man who would tear my world apart. And somehow, make me crave every broken piece. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I drifted in and out of the kind of restless haze that comes when your body is exhausted, but your mind is still chasing ghosts, looping through what happened over and over, replaying that deep, commanding voice, the way his eyes seemed to pin me to the floor, the way the air had felt too thin when he looked at me like he already knew every secret I'd ever buried. I told myself it was just fear, that my heart was pounding because of adrenaline, not because of him, not because of the strange pull that had settled deep inside me like a whisper I didn't understand. But when dawn came and light spilled through my cracked blinds, painting gold stripes across the peeling paint of my walls, all I could think about was the message on my phone. 2 words, 8 o'clock, same place, and how I had no intention of going, except I did. By 7:45 that evening, I was standing once again in front of the mansion's iron gates, my hands gripping the handle of my cleaning bag so tightly that my knuckles had gone pale, my stomach twisting in a knot of dread and something I didn't want to name. I told myself it was the money. I needed it, desperately, because rent was overdue, and my brother had called that morning asking for help again, his voice tight with worry, and something that sounded like shame. But deep down, I knew there was another reason. A darker one. Curiosity. The gates opened before I even pressed the buzzer, And that should have been my first warning that nothing in this world happened without him knowing it. The house looked different at night. The last time it had felt haunted. Tonight, it felt alive, pulsing with energy, the kind that hums through the veins of powerful men who move unseen but control everything. I walked through the foyer with quiet steps, trying not to stare at the paintings or the gleam of gold accents that caught the light. A man in a black suit appeared from a side hall, expressionless, precise, like he'd been trained not to breathe without permission, and gestured for me to follow. We moved down a long corridor that smelled faintly of leather and smoke until he opened a heavy double door and stepped aside. Inside, the room was dimly lit. Walls lined with dark wood and shelves full of books that looked untouched, the kind you keep not to read but to impress. The air was warmer here, scented with something faintly musky, expensive, masculine, impossible to ignore. And then there he was, seated behind a mahogany desk, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, hair slightly mussed in a way that looked too perfect to be accidental. He was signing papers, his pen moving with precise control, and I remember thinking that even the way he wrote felt like a threat. Sharp, deliberate, elegant. When he looked up, it was like being caught in a beam of heat. "You came back," he said, voice low, smooth as whiskey poured over ice. I didn't trust my voice not to betray me, so I just nodded, setting my bag on the floor. He leaned back in his chair, watching me for a long moment that stretched thin and breathless. "Most people don't come back once they've seen what you saw." "I needed the money," I said, because it was easier than telling him the truth, that I hadn't been able to stop thinking about him, that something about his eyes had followed me even in dreams. He smiled faintly, not mocking, not kind either, just dangerous. "Money," he repeated, as if testing the weight of the word. "That's a good reason. Honest." He stood then, and for a moment I thought he might walk past me, but instead he came closer. Close enough that I could see the faint stubble along his jaw, the shadow of exhaustion under his eyes, the kind of beauty that came from something cruel and unstoppable. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Lena." "Lena," he murmured like he was tasting it. "Pretty name." He circled me once, slow, like a predator studying its prey, and every instinct I had screamed at me to run, but my feet stayed where they were. "You work hard, Lena?" "Yes." "Good. You'll work here from now on." My heart stumbled. "Here?" He nodded. "My house. I need someone who's thorough, discreet, and smart enough to know when to keep her mouth shut. You seem to fit all three." I can't," I started. But he cut me off with a tilt of his head, a soft sound that silenced me more effectively than shouting ever could. "Don't worry. You'll be paid well. No one else will bother you. You'll have a room upstairs. But there are rules." Something in the way he said it made me shiver. "Rules?" He smiled then, slow, dark, devastating. "No locked doors, no questions, no noise after midnight." The words hung between us, heavy with meaning I didn't understand, and I felt that same pulse of fear and fascination twist tighter inside me. "What happens after midnight?" I asked before I could stop myself. His eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw something flicker there, something sharp, dangerous, almost like amusement. "You don't want to know, Dolcezza." He said it softly, in that lilting accent that made the word sound like a caress, but beneath it was a warning. I swallowed hard and nodded, because I understood that in his world, curiosity was as deadly as disobedience. He turned back to his desk, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. "You can start tomorrow. My men will bring your things." I didn't say yes, I blurted out, the words slipping free before I could stop them. He looked over his shoulder, and for a heartbeat I saw something dark flash in his expression. Annoyance, maybe, or interest. "You did," he said softly. "When you walked through that gate, you said yes." He wasn't wrong. The next morning, I woke up in my own bed, still unsure if I'd dreamed the entire encounter, until a car arrived outside my apartment and a man in a suit handed me a small envelope with my name written in perfect handwriting. Inside was a stack of cash and a single note. 8 a.m., don't be late. I should have burned it. I should have thrown it away, disappeared, taken the money, and never looked back. But instead, I packed my bag. Because that house, his house, was a mystery I couldn't stop myself from stepping deeper into. As the car drove me through winding roads toward the estate, I watched the city fade away and felt the world shift again. I told myself this was just another job, that people like him didn't notice girls like me, that I'd stay invisible, quiet, untouched. But the moment I stepped inside the mansion again, I saw him standing at the top of the stairs, phone in one hand, expression unreadable, and I knew he'd already been expecting me. His eyes found mine, steady and unflinching, and he gave the smallest nod, the kind that felt less like a greeting and more like a claim. "Welcome home, Lena," he said. And that was the moment I realized I wasn't walking into a job. I was walking into his world, a world built on secrets and sins, and I could already feel it pulling me under. What I didn't know then, as the doors closed behind me and the locks clicked into place, was that the house had more than one master, and one of them didn't want me there at all. I never realized how big that house truly was until I lived inside it, until the echo of my own footsteps became the only sound I heard for hours at a time, until I started to notice that every hallway seemed to lead to another, every door to another secret, and every silence to another unspoken rule. The mansion was a living thing. It breathed, it remembered, it listened. And sometimes, when I passed the long corridors at night, I swore it was whispering. The first few days were quiet, uneventful almost. But beneath that quiet was a tension I could feel like static against my skin, humming softly, warning me not to get too comfortable. Dante's men moved like shadows through the halls, always polite, always distant, but their eyes never softened, and their presence made the air heavy. They called him Signore Moretti, with a respect that bordered on fear, and though I didn't understand the language they spoke in hushed tones, I didn't have to. Fear, I learned, sounded the same in every tongue. Dante himself was rarely home in the mornings. I'd hear the sound of his car leaving before dawn, the deep growl of an engine fading into the distance, and for hours after that, the house felt suspended, like it was holding its breath until he returned. My job was simple enough: clean, organize, keep everything immaculate. But the truth was, nothing ever seemed to get dirty. The place was too perfect, too controlled, as though even dust feared to settle where he lived. It wasn't cleaning that filled my hours, it was waiting. Sometimes I'd wander through the west wing where the light was softer, golden and fractured through tall windows draped with heavy curtains, and I'd find myself drawn to a particular door near the end of the corridor, a door that was always locked. I didn't know why it fascinated me so much, why it called to me the way it did, but every time I passed it, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I'd catch myself lingering, fingertips brushing the cool brass handle, and every time I did, one of his men would appear from nowhere, his voice calm but sharp. "That area is off limits, Signorina." It was only later that I learned the truth, that in this house, curiosity wasn't just dangerous, it was unforgivable. On the fourth night, Dante came home early. I was in the kitchen, finishing up, when I heard the low rumble of his voice in the entry hall. There was something magnetic about that sound, the way it carried authority without effort. And before I realized it, I was standing in the doorway, watching him. He was on the phone, jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled up to his forearms, his tie loose like he'd been fighting the day itself. His expression was unreadable, eyes fixed on nothing as he spoke in Italian. Rapid, rhythmic, sharp enough to slice through the air. And though I couldn't understand the words, I could feel the weight of them, the kind of words that made other men obey. When he hung up, his gaze flicked toward me. For a heartbeat, I thought he'd be angry to find me staring, but instead he smiled that faint, dangerous smile that never reached his eyes. Couldn't sleep? I was just finishing the kitchen, I said, my voice too small in the vastness of that house. He nodded, taking a slow step closer. You're doing well here, he said, his tone low, calm, but heavy enough to make my pulse stutter. You follow the rules. I wanted to say something, thank you maybe, but the way he was looking at me made words feel fragile, like glass that would shatter if I tried to use them. He stepped even closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive that clung to him like sin. Do you know why I have rules, Lena? He asked softly. I shook my head, unable to look away. Because this house, he said, glancing around as though the walls themselves were listening, is not a home. It's a fortress. Everything that happens here, everything that is said or seen, stays here. The rules keep you safe. They keep me safe. His eyes lingered on mine, and there was something almost gentle in them for a brief, disarming moment before it faded back into that cold calm I was beginning to recognize as his armor. He reached out, his hand brushing my jaw in a gesture so light I might have imagined it. Do you trust me to keep you safe, Piccola? My throat tightened. I didn't know if it was fear or something else entirely that made my voice tremble when I answered, I don't know. He smiled faintly, but there was no humor in it. Good. Trust is dangerous. Obedience is safer. And just like that, he was gone, moving past me toward his office, leaving me standing in the dim kitchen with my heart beating too fast, and the taste of his words still lingering on my tongue. That night, I couldn't sleep. The mansion was too quiet, too still. Somewhere beyond my room, a clock ticked softly, marking time in a house that seemed to exist outside of it. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, listening for the sound of footsteps or voices, until finally, sometime after midnight, I heard it. The faint murmur of laughter, muffled and wrong. I slipped out of bed and moved toward the hallway, bare feet silent on the polished wood. The sound grew clearer. A man's voice, pleading, desperate, and another, lower one that made my stomach twist because I recognized it. Dante's. I followed the noise to the west wing, to that locked door I'd passed so many times before. The voices came from behind it, sharp and urgent, then a sound I couldn't mistake. A dull thud, followed by silence. My hand hovered near the handle, heart pounding so hard I thought I'd wake the house. Then, from the crack beneath the door, I saw it, light flickering, and a thin line of red sliding slowly across the floor. Blood. Again. I stumbled back, covering my mouth, trying to breathe, trying to tell myself it wasn't what I thought, that maybe I was imagining it, that maybe the world wasn't as dark as it suddenly seemed. But then I heard his voice again, calm and steady, like nothing had happened. Clean this up, no traces. I ran back to my room, my pulse screaming in my ears, and sat against the door until the sun began to rise. When I finally dared to look outside, the hallway was spotless. The door was closed. No trace of what I'd seen remained, as if the house itself had swallowed it whole. Later that morning, Dante appeared at breakfast, immaculate as ever, sipping coffee as though nothing had happened. He looked at me once, eyes unreadable, and said quietly, "You look tired." "I couldn't sleep," I murmured. He set his cup down, his gaze holding mine. "Then you heard," he said simply, not as a question but as a fact. I froze. "I didn't mean, stop." His voice was calm, not unkind, but final. "Remember what I told you. The rules exist for a reason." And then, as if nothing more needed to be said, he stood and walked away, leaving me with a truth that would haunt me. I was living in a house built on secrets, and I'd just heard one of them die. That night, when I closed my door and locked it, breaking the first of his rules, I finally understood what kind of world I'd stepped into. And I knew it was only a matter of time before the darkness inside this house reached for me too. The days that followed felt like walking through smoke, the kind that clings to your skin and seeps into your lungs until you can't tell where the air ends and the danger begins. And no matter how many rooms I scrubbed, no matter how clean the marble gleamed beneath my hands, I could still smell the faint trace of blood, like a secret the house refused to forget. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of light through the high windows felt charged, alive, and I couldn't decide if I was the one haunting this place or if it was haunting me. I told myself to keep my head down, to stay invisible, to pretend that what I'd heard that night in the West Wing was nothing more than a bad dream. But pretending became impossible when I saw him again, when Dante walked into the room with that calm, predatory grace that made the air shift as if it, too, bowed to him. He carried silence with him, the kind that bends a space into obedience, and even his men seemed to straighten when he passed, their eyes lowering just enough to show deference without weakness. That morning, he found me in the library, dusting shelves that didn't need it, my hands trembling just enough that I hoped he wouldn't notice. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching, not speaking, and when he finally did, his voice slid through the quiet like the stroke of a knife through velvet. "You've been avoiding me, Piccola." I froze, my back still to him, trying to gather myself before I turned, because I'd learned something about Dante Moretti. He could smell lies the way wolves smelled fear. "I've just been working," I said softly, but my voice wavered at the edges, betraying me. He crossed the room in 3 slow strides, stopping close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from him, the faint brush of his breath near the back of my neck. "Working," he repeated, and the word sounded different in his mouth, heavier, darker, as though it carried a meaning I wasn't brave enough to ask about. When I turned, my pulse stuttered because his face was so close to mine, too close, and I could see the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw, the tiny scar just beneath his lower lip, the way his eyes weren't just brown but layered with gold, like whiskey catching light. He tilted his head slightly, studying me, and in that moment, I wasn't sure if he was about to question me or kiss me, and the terrifying part was that I didn't know which one I wanted more. "I heard something I shouldn't have," I whispered finally, because the silence between us had grown too heavy, too dangerous. He didn't react at first, just watched me with that unblinking calm. And then slowly, he reached out, brushing his thumb against my cheek. The touch was light, almost absent, but it sent a shock through me so sharp I forgot how to breathe. "And yet you're still here," he murmured, voice low enough to feel rather than hear. "Why?" I didn't have an answer, not one that would make sense to either of us. I should have told him I stayed because I needed the money, because leaving meant danger, because something about the way he looked at me made it impossible to run. But instead I said nothing, because the truth was more complicated. I stayed because I couldn't stop thinking about him, because fear had started to taste too much like fascination. He smiled then, a small, knowing curve of his lips that wasn't kindness at all, but something else. Something that said he'd already figured out what I couldn't say. "You should be afraid of me, Lena," he said softly. "I am," I whispered, and the words felt like a confession. "Good," he murmured, his hand lingering at the side of my face, his fingers tracing the line of my jaw. "Fear keeps you alive, but don't mistake it for safety." He stepped back then, the spell breaking as suddenly as it began, and I felt the cold rush in where his warmth had been. "Go upstairs," he said, his tone returning to that calm authority I was learning to recognize as final. "Get some rest. You look tired." I wanted to argue, to ask what he wanted from me, why he kept circling closer only to pull away, but his expression left no room for questions. I nodded and turned toward the door, my heart pounding so hard it drowned out everything else. But before I could leave, his voice stopped me again. "Lena." I turned back, and he was still watching me. But this time his gaze had softened, just a fraction, enough to make it dangerous. "Don't go near the West Wing again," he said. "If you value your life, stay out." He didn't wait for me to answer. He simply turned away, and I walked out with my mind spinning and my pulse still echoing his touch. That night I dreamt of him, of his hands, of his voice, of the way his eyes seemed to strip away the walls I'd spent years building to protect myself from men like him. And when I woke in the darkness, breathless and trembling, I knew it wasn't just fear anymore. It was something deeper, heavier, something I didn't want to name because naming it would make it real. The next morning, the house was buzzing with quiet tension. Men came and went through the front hall, carrying files and whispers. I caught fragments of their words: shipment, territory, betrayal, but none of it made sense to me. Dante was gone, and his absence felt like the air itself had thickened, pressing down on everyone inside those walls. By noon, I found myself wandering again, cleaning for the sake of motion, because stillness meant thinking, and thinking meant danger. I ended up in the sunroom, surrounded by glass and light, when I saw it. His coat, draped carelessly across the back of a chair. It was heavy, expensive, the kind of fabric that felt wrong beneath my fingertips, too rich for hands like mine, and yet I couldn't help it. I reached out, brushing the edge of it with trembling fingers, imagining for one foolish heartbeat what it would feel like to belong in a world where people wore things like this, where people like him existed without needing to destroy everything they touched. "Does it suit you?" I spun around, startled, and there he was, standing in the doorway, watching me with that faint amusement that never reached his eyes. "I wasn't touching my things," he finished for me, stepping closer. "You were." "I'm sorry, I was just curious." He nodded, his tone neither angry nor kind. Curiosity again. He walked toward me slowly, every step deliberate, and when he stopped in front of me, he reached out and took my wrist, his touch firm but not painful, his fingers circling the delicate bones like he was testing how fragile I might be. "You keep testing the limits, Lena," he said, his voice low, almost thoughtful. "Do you know what happens to people who test me?" I swallowed hard, shaking my head, unable to look away from his eyes. "They either learn," he said softly, "or they burn." And then he let me go, the ghost of his touch still imprinted on my skin, his words sinking deep enough that I knew I'd never forget them. That night, when I stood at my window watching the dark stretch across the fields, I couldn't tell if I was afraid of him or of myself, because every time he came near, something inside me shifted. Something dangerous and alive. Something that wanted to reach for him even when I knew better. And when I finally closed my eyes, I realized that the sound I'd been hearing outside my door wasn't just the house settling. It was footsteps, slow and steady, moving past my room and stopping just long enough that I knew he was there, listening. The next morning, when I woke, there was a single white rose on my nightstand, its petals perfect, its stem cut short, and beside it, a note written in that same sharp, elegant handwriting. "Fear keeps you alive, but I'm starting to wonder what you'd look like without it." I stared at the words until the ink blurred, and my pulse matched the rhythm of my breath. And for the first time, I realized the truth. He wasn't just testing me. He was teaching me what it meant to be owned. There are moments in life when the world tilts just slightly, almost imperceptibly, but enough that you know nothing will ever feel straight again. And living in that house, under Dante Moretti's roof, meant existing in a constant state of that tilt, caught between fascination and fear, desire and danger, truth and the lies I kept telling myself to survive. Days melted into each other like candle wax dripping down the same scarred holder. Beautiful at first, but then hardening into something heavy, something permanent. And each one carried a tension I couldn't name but could feel deep in my bones, humming quietly beneath every breath I took. The mornings always began the same way. The sound of footsteps in the hall, the muted murmur of men speaking in low Italian, the smell of espresso and tobacco trailing faintly through the corridors like ghosts of another life I didn't belong to. Dante would usually be gone before I even left my room, his absence leaving the air hollow. The house quieter, but never safer. He had a way of filling a space even when he wasn't in it, of leaving pieces of himself behind like shadows clinging to the walls. I told myself I was fine, that I could handle the unease that came with living in his world, that if I just kept my head down, kept cleaning, kept obeying the rules, I'd stay invisible. But invisibility is a myth when someone like Dante has already decided you're worth watching. That morning, I found something that changed everything. I'd been sent to clean the study on the second floor, the one lined with books I doubted he'd ever read, and windows that overlooked the long drive leading to the iron gates. The air in that room was always colder, maybe because of the marble floors, or maybe because of what that room held, a sense of calculation, of control. It was the only room where Dante allowed no one but me to clean. And though I told myself it was because he trusted me, a part of me knew it was because he wanted to see if I'd follow the rules even when he wasn't watching. I started dusting the desk first, careful not to disturb the neat stacks of papers or the silver pen set that gleamed under the faint light. Everything about Dante was precise. His handwriting, his organization, even the way his objects seemed to know where they belonged. But as I wiped the edge of the desk, my rag caught against the corner of a drawer, and I heard a faint click, a hidden latch. My breath caught. I shouldn't have opened it. I knew that even before my fingers found the edge of the panel and pushed, but curiosity had become a sickness inside me, one I couldn't cure no matter how many times he warned me. The drawer slid open, revealing a second compartment beneath the false bottom, and what I saw inside made my heart stop. Photographs, files, a handgun, and a single manila folder with my name printed neatly across the top. For a long moment I couldn't move. My own name, staring back at me from his desk, written in his unmistakable handwriting. My throat felt dry, my pulse pounding in my ears as I reached for it, my fingers trembling. Inside were pages, reports, photos, documents I didn't understand but recognized as records of my life. My apartment address, my cleaning company's information, my brother's name, Liam. My vision blurred as I flipped through the pages. Arrest records, unpaid debts, even a hospital bill from when he'd broken his hand 2 years ago. Dante knew everything. He hadn't just found me by chance. He'd chosen me. The realization sank into me like ice, numbing everything it touched. I didn't hear him come in. I only noticed him when his reflection appeared in the window across from me, tall, still, silent, watching. Looking for something, Piccola? The sound of his voice was quiet, but it hit me like a strike, sharp and cold. I turned slowly, clutching the folder to my chest, unable to mask the terror that must have been written all over my face. I started, but the words tangled on my tongue, useless. He stepped closer, his expression unreadable, his eyes dark enough to drown in. You broke the first rule, he said softly, each word deliberate. No locked doors, No secrets opened. I wasn't trying to— Don't lie to me. The calm in his tone scared me more than if he'd shouted. He moved closer until the desk was between us, his hand resting lightly on its edge, his gaze pinned to mine like he was dissecting the truth. You went through my things. I saw my name. He tilted his head, eyes narrowing. And you thought what? That I keep random files on every woman who cleans my house? The silence stretched between us, heavy and unbearable. Why do you have this? I whispered. He exhaled slowly, then came around the desk. Because I don't let strangers into my home without knowing who they are. You think I'd let someone walk freely through my life without knowing what they could destroy? I wanted to believe him, wanted to tell myself it made sense. But then he said the next thing, and the ground beneath me shifted again. Your brother works for people who've been stealing from me. My stomach turned to stone. That's not true. It is. His voice was steady, too calm, too certain. He's been moving information, names, routes, shipments, things he shouldn't even know about. And when I traced where it came from, it led to you. No, I said, shaking my head, my hands trembling. You're wrong. He's not like that. He's just a kid trying to survive. Dante's gaze softened for the briefest moment, then hardened again. We all are. But survival comes with choices, and your brother made the wrong one. I didn't know what to say. The world was tilting again, faster this time, everything I thought I knew slipping away like sand through my fingers. I didn't want you to find out this way, he said quietly. But maybe it's better you know. Maybe now you'll understand why you can't leave. Can't leave? I repeated, my voice breaking. He nodded, taking another step closer until the space between us was filled with tension so thick it hurt to breathe. Not until I decide what to do with him. Please, I said, the word falling from my lips like a prayer. Don't hurt him. He didn't mean— Stop. His voice cut through mine, not cruel but final. You don't know what you're asking. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time I saw the man beneath the legend, the exhaustion, the weight of decisions that couldn't be undone, the traces of mercy he tried to bury under the armor of control. Why are you telling me this? I whispered. He stared at me for a long time before answering. Because you're already part of it, and I don't want you to pretend you're not. His words were a confession and a warning, and I couldn't decide which terrified me more. When he left the room, he didn't take the folder. He didn't have to. I stood there staring at it, my name written in his careful script, and realized that my life, my brother's life, every breath I took from now on, existed inside that manila file, owned, cataloged, controlled. That night I sat in my room, staring at the door, listening for the sound of footsteps that might never come. And when I finally lay down, too exhausted to cry, too numb to move, I realized something that made my blood run cold. Dante hadn't told me everything. He'd told me just enough to keep me exactly where he wanted me, close enough to watch, but not close enough to see what he was truly hiding. And somewhere beneath that house, behind those locked doors and whispered rules, was the rest of the truth. The truth about my brother, the truth about him, and the truth about what I was becoming. There are nights that come softly, the kind that drift in like a sigh, carrying the scent of rain and the sound of quiet, safe breathing. But then there are nights that arrive like a storm with no warning, a night that crashes through the world and leaves it bleeding in its wake. And that was the night everything burned, the night when all the lines between fear and love, loyalty and survival, blurred into something wild and irretrievable. I remember the sky first. It was a strange, bruised color, purple sinking into black, as if the stars themselves were afraid to watch what was about to happen. The house was too still. the kind of stillness that feels wrong, like the calm before a scream. I was in my room, sitting on the edge of the bed, the file still open beside me, Dante's words echoing endlessly in my head. Your brother works for people who've been stealing from me. I'd spent the whole day convincing myself it wasn't true, that there had to be some mistake, that Dante's world was full of shadows where lies could masquerade as truth, and that Liam was innocent, that he was just another name caught in the crossfire of whatever dark empire Dante commanded. But deep down, beneath all the denial and hope, I already knew I was lying to myself. The first sound was distant, like thunder, except sharper, faster, closer. Then another, then shouts, gunfire. I froze, my breath catching somewhere between my ribs, the sound slicing through the silence like a blade. For a moment, I couldn't move. The walls seemed to pulse with noise, footsteps pounding against the floors below, the heavy thud of doors slamming, men shouting orders in Italian, voices sharp and frantic. My first thought was to hide, to curl into the smallest version of myself and wait for it to end. But something deeper, something primal, told me to move. I grabbed my jacket, yanked the door open, and stepped into chaos. The air smelled of smoke already, the acrid sting of gunpowder mixing with the faint scent of Dante's cologne that still lingered in the hallways. Men were running, armed, their faces tight with focus. One of them, Marco, I thought his name was, saw me and shouted, "Get back inside, now!" But I didn't, because I saw Dante. He was at the end of the hall, moving like a force of nature. No hesitation, no fear, just that terrifying calm that made everything around him fall into rhythm. He was barking orders, loading a gun with the precision of a man who'd done it too many times, and when his eyes found mine across the smoke and noise, something in my chest broke open. "What the hell are you doing out here?" he snapped, striding toward me. "I heard, what's happening?" I managed, my voice shaking. He grabbed my arm, his grip firm but not cruel, his face inches from mine. "We're under attack. You need to get downstairs to the cellar now." "Who?" He didn't let me finish. "Go, Lena," he barked, but before I could move, a window shattered behind us, and the crack of a bullet echoed so close I could feel it in my teeth. He pulled me down, his body slamming into mine, shielding me with a force that stole my breath. The smell of smoke and blood filled the air, and for one terrifying second I felt warmth spreading against my arm that wasn't mine. When he looked at me again, his face was pale, his jaw tight. "You're hurt," I whispered. But he just shook his head, pressing his hand against his side where crimson was already seeping through the fabric of his shirt. "Not bad," he muttered, though the strain in his voice betrayed him. "Stay." Low. He fired once, twice, the sound deafening in the narrow hall, and somewhere below us I heard someone scream. The world had dissolved into chaos, but all I could see was him. His focus, his control, the raw violence of the man who ruled this house with blood and silence. When he finally pulled me toward the stairs, I could barely keep up. We stumbled into the grand foyer, smoke curling through the air, shadows flickering against the high walls. I could hear the crackle of fire now, faint but growing, the first whisper of destruction spreading through the mansion's bones. "Downstairs," he ordered again, pushing open a door that led to the cellar. But when I turned, I saw it, one of his men lying motionless near the entrance, a gun still clutched in his hand. I stopped, unable to move, my heart clawing at my ribs. Dante's voice softened, just slightly. "Lena, don't look." But I couldn't help it. I looked anyway. Because that was what I did. I looked where I shouldn't. I asked questions that got people killed. I cared when caring was a death sentence. "Is it them?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He nodded once. "Rossi's men, they want territory. They'll take the house if they can." "And my brother?" The question tore out of me before I could stop it. Did they use him? His silence was the answer. The air felt like it was collapsing around us. Something inside me fractured then, not because of the danger, not even because of the blood, but because I realized that the war he'd been fighting, the one that had always felt so far away, had somehow wrapped itself around my family, my life, until there was no escaping it. A new explosion shook the ground, closer this time. Dante swore under his breath, dragging me toward the cellar door, but I resisted, my hand gripping his sleeve. "You're bleeding," I said again, and this time there was panic in my voice. "You need help." He turned, his expression unreadable. But there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Something raw, human, unguarded. "You think this is the first time someone's tried to kill me?" "No, but nothing," he cut in, though his voice softened around the edges. "Get in the cellar, Lena, please." The word, please, broke something in me. I had never heard it from him before. I helped him down the stairs anyway, my arm under his as we descended into the dim light of the basement. The air was damp, cold, smelling faintly of stone and iron. He leaned against the wall, his hand pressed to his wound, blood seeping between his fingers. When I tried to pull away, he caught my wrist, his grip weak but still commanding. "Don't go up there," he said, his voice barely a whisper now. "Whatever happens, stay here." "I can't just—" "You can." His eyes locked on mine, fierce even through the pain. "You're not part of this. You shouldn't have been. I tried to keep you safe." I felt tears sting my eyes, though I wasn't sure if they were from fear or fury. "Safe? You call this safe?" He almost smiled, a broken, weary thing. "Safer than the truth." And then the world above us roared again, another explosion. Closer this time, the sound of splintering glass, of walls giving way. I didn't think. I moved. I tore a strip from my shirt and pressed it to his wound, my hands shaking but steady enough to keep pressure. His jaw tightened, but he didn't push me away. His fingers brushed my cheek again, the faintest ghost of a touch. And when I looked at him, his eyes had softened in a way I'd never seen before. "Don't you dare leave me," he murmured. And even through the chaos, even with fire creeping closer and death in the air, it wasn't a command. It was a plea. I leaned closer, my breath trembling. "I'm not going anywhere." Above us, the house moaned as if it were alive, the sound of flames crawling through wood, of everything collapsing in slow, burning agony. And in that moment, as I held him there in the flickering light, I realized the truth that I had been running from since the night I met him. Some part of me belonged to him now, the part that found beauty in ruin, that saw salvation in monsters. When the door above us finally burst open and one of his men shouted that the attackers were retreating, Dante's head fell back against the wall, his breath shallow but steady. He looked at me then, a faint smirk ghosting across his lips despite the blood. "See," he whispered. "I told you, not my first time." But as I helped him to his feet and heard the fire still raging above us, I knew something had changed forever. The house would survive, maybe. He would survive somehow. But something between us had caught fire that couldn't be put out. And as I led him up those stairs, through smoke and ruin, I realized with a shiver that the girl who had walked into this mansion weeks ago was already gone, burned away in the same flames that had tried, and failed, to consume him. There is a strange quiet that comes after violence, a silence so deep it feels alive, pressing against the walls, filling every breath with the weight of what has just happened. And that was the quiet that wrapped itself around the mansion after the gunfire stopped, after the shouting had faded, after the smoke began to thin and drift away, like ghosts reluctant to leave the scene of their own haunting. The air still smelled of burning wood and blood, and every surface seemed to hum with the echo of chaos. But beneath it all, there was this stillness, a fragile, trembling kind of peace that didn't belong to anyone, but somehow belonged to him, because Dante Moretti had survived again, as though death itself had grown tired of chasing him. We were in one of the smaller rooms on the first floor, a guest suite I had turned into something that resembled a place for healing, though nothing about it felt safe or sterile. The sheets were clean but damp with the scent of antiseptic. The table beside the bed littered with bandages and blood-stained cloths, and the curtains drawn tight against the faint orange glow that still pulsed from the burning wing of the house. Dante lay back against the pillows, his shirt gone, his skin pale under the dim light. The wound in his side wrapped tightly where I'd pressed my shaking hands hours before. His eyes were closed, but I knew he wasn't asleep. He never really slept. He rested the way wild animals do, half alert, half waiting for something to strike again. I sat beside the bed, my hands still trembling as I rinsed another cloth in warm water. I'd never been this close to him before, not like this, not without the armor of distance that usually separated us. And now, seeing him like this, bare, quiet, human, something inside me began to unravel. He wasn't the unshakable monster people whispered about in alleyways, or the shadowed man who spoke in threats disguised as promises. He was still dangerous, yes, but in that moment, he was also breakable. And that was the most terrifying thing of all, because I didn't know how to look at him without wanting to touch him. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than I'd ever heard it, soft but heavy with exhaustion. "You're still here." I glanced up, meeting his eyes, those same eyes that had terrified me the first night I'd seen them, but now held something I couldn't name. "You told me not to leave." His lips curved faintly, though it wasn't really a smile. Most people would have run by now. Maybe I'm not like most people. He studied me for a long moment, his gaze tracing my face in a way that made my heart stutter, as if he were memorizing me just in case he didn't make it through the night. "You should be," he murmured finally, closing his eyes again. "The world would hurt you less." I didn't answer. I didn't tell him that the world had already hurt me enough to make his kind of danger feel almost familiar. Instead, I reached for the cloth and gently pressed it to his skin, wiping away the traces of dried blood that had escaped the bandages. His breath hitched, just slightly, and for the first time I felt the power shift between us, just a little. I wasn't sure if he felt it too, but his hand moved suddenly, catching my wrist, holding it still against him. His skin was warm, feverish, his pulse steady beneath my touch. And when I looked up, he was watching me again, his eyes darker now, unreadable. "Why are you doing this?" he asked softly. "Because someone has to." Marco could have... I didn't want Marco. The words came out before I could stop them, and once they were out, there was no taking them back. His gaze sharpened, searching my face for something I didn't want him to find. "You didn't want Marco," he repeated quietly, his thumb brushing just above my wrist. A small, thoughtless gesture that sent heat through me in ways I didn't understand. "What is it you want, then, Dolcezza?" I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened, not painfully, just enough to keep me there, suspended in that moment where everything I'd tried to deny about the way I felt burned through my defenses like fire through paper. "I want you to stop looking at me like that," I said, though even I didn't believe the lie. He tilted his head slightly, that faint smile ghosting over his lips again, the one that wasn't really amusement, but recognition. "Like what?" "Like you already know how this ends." He released my wrist then, his hand falling back to the bed, and for a while neither of us spoke. I finished cleaning the wound, wrapping it tighter this time, my movements slow and deliberate. The only sounds were his breathing, the faint hiss of the fire outside, and the rhythmic beat of my own pulse in my ears. When I was done, I sat back, exhaling, and realized my hands were still shaking. "You did well," he said quietly. I laughed, though it came out more like a breath. I have no idea what I'm doing. You kept me alive. That's more than most people manage. Something about the way he said it, casual, almost affectionate, made my chest tighten. I looked at him again, really looked, and realized how close I was sitting. His face was half in shadow, his hair mussed from sweat, a faint line of stubble along his jaw, and for a heartbeat I forgot about everything else. The blood, the fire, the lies, my brother, and saw only the man in front of me. I reached up without thinking, to brush a strand of hair from his forehead, and he didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't stop me. The moment my fingers touched his skin, something inside me shifted again. That same dangerous pull that had been growing since the first night in his house, now stronger, heavier, inevitable. "Don't," he whispered, though he didn't sound like he meant it. "Why?" "Because you don't know what you're doing." "Maybe I do." His eyes opened then, locking on mine, and for a long, breathless moment, neither of us moved. The air between us felt electric, sharp with everything we weren't saying. I could feel the warmth of him, the slow rise and fall of his chest, the way his gaze dropped briefly to my lips before coming back to my eyes. And then, very slowly, he lifted his hand, tracing the back of his fingers along my jaw, the touch so light it felt like a confession. "You don't belong in my world," he said, his voice low, rough, almost pleading. "Maybe I already do." He exhaled, a sound caught somewhere between a sigh and a curse, and then his hand slid to the back of my neck, pulling me closer until our foreheads touched. His breath mingled with mine, and I could feel the war inside him, the way his control frayed just enough to let me see the man behind the mask. "I'll destroy you," he whispered, his voice shaking just slightly, the first crack I'd ever heard in it. "Then do it gently," I breathed, and that was the moment he kissed me. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't sweet. It was desperate. Raw. A collision of everything we'd been holding back, everything that had been burning between us since the night I found blood on his floor. His hand tangled in my hair, mine fisted in his sheets, and for that heartbeat, the world outside didn't exist. The fire, the violence, the truth, they were gone. There was only him. When he finally pulled away, his breath ragged, his forehead still against mine, he whispered, "You should hate me for this." "Maybe I will," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "But not tonight." He laughed then softly, the sound low and broken, like someone remembering what it felt like to be alive. I stayed beside him until dawn, neither of us speaking again. The fire outside had finally died, leaving only smoke and silence. And as the first light crept through the curtains, I realized that something else had burned that night too. The distance between us, the illusion of control, the lie that I could ever leave this house untouched. Because somewhere between blood and desire, I had stopped being his housekeeper, his responsibility, his mistake. I had become his weakness. And that, I knew even then, would destroy us both. The morning after the fire dawned heavy and gray, the kind of light that carries no warmth, only exhaustion. And when I opened my eyes, the world felt both new and ruined, as if something had ended in the night but hadn't yet realized it was gone. The house smelled faintly of smoke and antiseptic, the air thick with silence, the kind that doesn't come from peace but from aftermath, from the weight of survival pressing down on everything that's left standing. Dante was still asleep beside me, or maybe he wasn't asleep at all but pretending, his body still, his breath even, his face turned slightly toward the faint light leaking through the curtains. I lay there for a long time watching him, tracing the faint bruise at his temple, the line of his jaw, the way his mouth softened in rare moments of stillness, and I wondered if he'd ever been just a man before the world made him into what he was now. A weapon. A myth. A name that made people flinch. When he finally opened his eyes, there was no confusion there, no disorientation from sleep, only that same quiet watchfulness, like he'd been waiting for me to speak first. "You should eat something," he said softly, his voice rough. And for a moment I wanted to pretend that we were somewhere else, that we were ordinary people waking up after an ordinary night. "I'm not hungry," I murmured. And he didn't argue. Just studied me the way he always did. Careful, precise, as if he was reading a language only he understood. "You didn't sleep," he said, and I almost laughed because it wasn't a question. "You're thinking about what I told you," he added after a moment. And that time it wasn't a guess. It was the truth. I looked away, focusing on the faint light shifting across the ceiling. "About my brother?" "Yes." I hesitated, unsure if I wanted to hear what came next. But curiosity and dread had become the same thing inside me. Two sides of the same coin I couldn't stop flipping. "Tell me everything," I said finally, my voice steady though my hands weren't. He sat up slowly, wincing as his hand pressed against the bandage at his side. The movement pulled at the muscles of his stomach, the faint sheen of sweat catching the dim light. And for one fleeting second, I hated myself for noticing beauty in the man who was about to destroy the last piece of my family. He reached for a glass of water on the table, drank, and then set it down with deliberate care, as though choosing his words required precision. "Your brother," he began, his tone quiet but unflinching, "worked for a man named Gianni Rossi. You've heard the name before, yes?" I nodded. Rossi was the name whispered through the house in the dark corners, where I wasn't supposed to listen. The rival family, the ones who had sent bullets through the windows, the ones who wanted everything Dante controlled. "He wasn't one of Rossi's men," Dante continued. "Not at first. He was desperate, and desperate men are easy to buy. He started small, running messages, handling deliveries, pretending he didn't know what was inside the boxes. Then he got deeper. Money does that. It makes you believe you're still innocent even as you start bleeding for it." I felt my stomach twist, the room tilting slightly. "You don't know him," I whispered. "I know his kind," Dante said quietly, not cruelly, just certain, the way men who've seen too much are certain of everything ugly. "I've been his kind. You think you can control how deep you fall, but you can't." "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, my voice cracking despite my effort to sound calm. "Why after everything?" He met my eyes then, and the look in them wasn't pity. It was honesty. And somehow that was worse. "Because last night wasn't just an attack," he said. "It was a message. They wanted me dead, yes, but they wanted you to see what happens to people who betray me. They wanted to remind me that they have leverage." "I don't understand," I said, though part of me already did. "They have your brother, Lena." The words hit like a blade slipping between my ribs, slow and precise. "No," I said immediately, shaking my head, my voice breaking. "No, he wouldn't. He wouldn't go to them." "He already did," Dante said quietly. "And now they're using him. They know what you mean to me." "What I mean to you," I repeated, my voice rising, trembling. "What does that even mean? You don't even know me." He leaned forward. Then, his voice low, steady, the kind that could command armies and confessions all at once. "You think I don't? You think I haven't been watching you since the day you walked into my house? Every word, every silence, every time you flinched when you heard my voice. I know you, Lena. And they do too. They took him because they knew it would hurt you. Because they knew hurting you would hurt me." I didn't want to believe him, but the truth was already unraveling inside me, pulling apart the thin fabric of denial I'd been clinging to since the moment I found that folder. I wanted to hate him for it, for being right, for making me see what I didn't want to see, but I couldn't. Because even now, even after all of it, part of me still wanted to trust him. "What are you going to do?" I asked finally, my voice small, almost childlike. He looked away then, his jaw tightening, his hand curling into a fist against his thigh. "I'm going to get him back," he said, "because they crossed a line. But when I find him, you need to understand something." "What?" "If what I find proves what I already know, if he's been feeding them information, if he's the reason my men are dead and my house is burning, I won't be merciful." The words dropped into the silence like stones, and for a long moment I couldn't breathe. "You're going to kill him," I said, not as a question, but as the realization it was. He didn't answer. "Dante," I whispered, my voice breaking, "please don't." He turned back to me then, and for the first time I saw something raw in his eyes, something that looked almost like regret. "Don't make me choose between you and everything I've built," he said softly, "because I already know which one I'll destroy." The tears came then, hot and useless, and I hated myself for letting him see them, for giving him the satisfaction of my breaking. But he didn't look satisfied. He looked haunted. When he reached for me, I flinched, not because I was afraid of him, but because I was afraid of how much I wanted his touch even now. "Don't," I said, my voice shaking. "Don't comfort me. Not if you're going to—" He stopped, his hand suspended in the air between us. "You think I want to hurt you?" he asked quietly. "I think you already have." Something flickered in his expression then, a flash of pain that disappeared as quickly as it came. "You don't understand what this world is," he said finally, his voice low. "There's no clean way out. There's no good side to stand on. There's only survival." "And what if I don't want to survive like this?" He looked at me for a long time before answering, his tone barely above a whisper. "Then you shouldn't have walked through my door." The silence that followed was heavier than any sound could have been. He stood slowly, wincing as he adjusted his bandage, and when he reached the door, he paused, his back to me. "I'm leaving at dawn," he said. "If you want to see your brother again, stay here. If you leave, I can't protect you." I wanted to scream, to beg, to hit him, to say anything that might undo the inevitability in his voice, but the words died on my tongue. When he was gone, the room felt colder, emptier, like the air itself had thinned. I sank to the floor beside the bed, pressing my hands to my face, and for the first time I let myself break completely. The sun hadn't risen yet, but I could already see the faint light bleeding through the cracks in the curtains, the world moving forward whether I wanted it to or not. And as I sat there, surrounded by the remnants of everything I thought I knew, I realized something with terrifying clarity. No matter what Dante found, no matter what truth waited out there in the gray dawn, I was already part of his world, and there was no way back. The night before he left, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my brother's face, the way he'd looked the last time I saw him. Defiant but exhausted, always trying to protect me even when I didn't need it, even when it broke him to do it. And then I saw Dante, his expression carved from stone, his voice low and final as he said those words that had been burning in my chest ever since. "Don't make me choose between you and everything I've built." Because deep down, I already knew the truth. Dante Moretti never chose mercy when vengeance was on the table, and yet some part of me still wanted to believe that I could reach him, that I could find some sliver of the man I had seen in the quiet moments between the violence, the man who looked at me like I wasn't just another pawn in his empire of blood. The hours bled together in silence, the house still recovering from the chaos of the attack, and I wandered through its wounded halls like a ghost, my bare feet silent against the marble that had once gleamed but now carried faint traces of soot and ash. The walls still smelled faintly of smoke, the air thick with the memory of fire, and every creak felt like a heartbeat. A reminder that the house, like me, had survived, but not without scars. When dawn came, the world outside was muted, gray and fragile, as though the sky itself feared what the day would bring. I found Dante in the front hall, dressed in black, his shirt buttoned to the throat, the bandage beneath it hidden but not forgotten. His men stood near the door, armed, waiting, silent. He looked up when he heard me, and for a moment something flickered across his face. A shadow of softness, of regret. But it vanished before I could name it. "You shouldn't be up," he said quietly, and his voice was almost gentle, but the steel beneath it was unmistakable. "I couldn't sleep." He nodded once, adjusting his cufflinks, his movements precise, practiced. "Stay inside today, if anything happens." "I'm coming with you," I said, cutting him off, and the words came out firmer than I expected, steadier than I felt. He stopped, his hand frozen mid-motion, and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "No," he said finally, softly but with an authority that left no room for argument. "Dante, please," I began, stepping closer. "He's my brother. I can't just sit here while you—" "While I what?" he interrupted, his tone suddenly sharp, his patience thinning. "While I clean up the mess he made? While I finish what he started?" The words hit me like a slap, and for a moment I just stared at him, my throat too tight to speak. "You don't even know if he's guilty," I whispered finally. "I know enough." "No," I said, my voice rising despite the tremor in it. "You know what people told you. You know what your files say. You don't know him." He exhaled slowly, the faintest hint of weariness in the sound. And when he looked at me again, his eyes were darker, colder. "And you don't know what he's done," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You think this is about money, about some small betrayal? It's not. It's blood. My men died because of him. My home burned because of him." I shook my head, stepping back, my heart pounding. "You don't have proof." His lips twitched, not in amusement but something closer to pity. "I don't need proof. I have instinct. And instinct has kept me alive long enough to know when someone's lying to me." "Then you should know I'm not." He stared at me for a long time, and the silence between us was unbearable. When he finally spoke again, his tone was quiet, almost tender, and that made it worse. "Stay here, Lena. Don't make me worry about you." And then he was gone. The sound of engines filled the air a few minutes later, low and distant, like thunder fading into the horizon. I stood at the window and watched the black convoy disappear down the long drive, my hands pressed against the glass, my reflection pale and hollow staring back at me. And I knew in that instant that I couldn't stay. Because if I did, I'd lose both of them. I didn't have a plan, not really. Just desperation and fear and a kind of reckless hope that made no sense but refused to die. I stole one of the smaller cars from the garage, one of the ones his men used for errands, and drove with shaking hands, following the path I'd seen on one of the maps in his study, the one marked with red circles and arrows. It led out of the city, into the hills, to an abandoned factory that looked like it had been built for secrets. By the time I got there, the air was heavy with smoke again, though this time it wasn't from fire but from gunpowder, the kind that clings to your skin and crawls into your lungs. I parked the car far enough away to stay hidden, but close enough to hear the faint echo of shouting carried on the wind. They were already inside. I moved carefully, keeping low, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The building loomed ahead, its windows shattered, its walls cracked and rusted, and every step I took echoed like a betrayal. Inside, the air was thick with tension and dust. I could hear Dante's voice, calm and cold, cutting through the noise like a blade. "You think you can take from me and walk away?" he said, his tone deadly quiet. And then another voice. Broken. Familiar. Terrified. I didn't have a choice. Liam. The sound of my brother's voice hit me like a shock, and for a moment my vision blurred. I crept closer, my fingers gripping the edge of a broken wall, peering through the gap. Dante stood in the center of the room, gun in hand, his men flanking him. Liam was on his knees, his hands bound, his face pale and bruised, his eyes wide with fear. Please, Liam was saying, his voice shaking. They said they'd kill her if I didn't help them, if I didn't give them what they wanted. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Dante's expression didn't change. And what did they want? Information, routes, schedules. I swear I didn't tell them everything. I just needed the money. The money? Dante interrupted, his tone sharp, disbelieving. You sold my men for money? Liam shook his head frantically, tears streaking through the grime on his face. No, it wasn't like that. They had her picture, they said they'd kill her, I couldn't. Dante's hand tightened around the gun. You brought war into my house and you think that excuses it? I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My brother's voice cracked, pleading, desperate. Please, I didn't want anyone to die. And then Dante raised the gun. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I stepped out from behind the wall, my voice echoing through the cavernous space before I even realized I'd spoken. Stop! The sound of my voice froze everything. Dante turned, his eyes widening slightly when he saw me, shock flashing across his face before hardening back into anger. What the hell are you doing here? Don't do this, I said, stepping closer, ignoring the way his men tensed, their guns shifting toward me. He's telling the truth. You said they used him, that they wanted to hurt you through me. Well, here I am. They won. Dante's jaw tightened, his voice dangerously calm. You shouldn't be here, Lena. Then don't make me watch this, I whispered. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the faint creak of the building settling and the uneven rhythm of my own heartbeat. Dante's hand didn't waver, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. The war between the man who'd survived by killing and the man who'd kissed me like he wanted to be saved. Please, I said again, my voice breaking. Don't make me hate you. Something in him shifted then, just slightly, and I thought, God, I truly thought he might lower the gun. But before he could, before I could move, before the air could settle, there was a flash of movement from the shadows behind him, the glint of steel, the sound of a gunshot that wasn't his. The world went white. Someone screamed. I think it was me. And Dante staggered, the gun falling from his hand as blood bloomed dark against his shoulder. His men shouted, chaos erupted, and as the sound of gunfire filled the air again, I ran toward him, my only thought, my only word, his name. Dante? He turned his head toward me, his eyes dazed but still burning with that same fierce light. And then another shot rang out, closer this time, and everything around us shattered. The world didn't end with an explosion, or a scream, or even the final breath of the man I loved. It ended with silence. That heavy, aching kind of silence that falls after chaos, when the smoke has begun to settle but the heart hasn't yet caught up to what it's lost. When every sound feels too loud, and every heartbeat feels like an echo that shouldn't still exist. I don't remember hitting the floor, or how my knees found the cold concrete beneath me, or how my hands reached for him. Only that suddenly Dante was there, half-conscious, blood seeping between my fingers as I pressed my palm against his wound and begged the universe for mercy I didn't believe in anymore. There was shouting all around us, his men firing back at shadows, my brother calling my name, the walls trembling as bullets chewed through air and steel. But all I could hear was Dante's breathing, shallow and ragged, each exhale sounding like something fragile breaking. His eyes found mine, glassy but still burning, and for a heartbeat it was just us again, the world narrowing until everything beyond that moment ceased to exist. Lena, he said, his voice rough, broken, the faintest ghost of a smile tugging at his mouth even as blood stained his lips. "You shouldn't have come." "I had to," I whispered, my throat raw, my hands slick with red. "I couldn't let you kill him." He tried to laugh, but it came out as a wince. "You never listen." Another shot tore through the air, close enough that it made me flinch. But I didn't move. I couldn't. My hands trembled as I tried to stop the bleeding, pressing harder, my breath shaking with every heartbeat that pulsed beneath my fingers. "Stay with me," I begged, my voice breaking. "Please, Dante, stay with me." He reached up weakly, his hand brushing my cheek, his fingers tracing the line of my jaw with the same tenderness he'd shown that night in the darkened room when everything between us had shifted. "You don't belong in this," he murmured, his breath hot against my skin. "You never did." "And yet I'm here," I said, the words tumbling out between sobs. "So maybe I do." His lips curved again, but his eyes fluttered, the light in them flickering like a candle caught in the wind. Behind me, I heard my brother shout my name again, desperate, panicked, but I couldn't answer him, not yet. And then I saw him, Liam, stumbling out of the smoke, his face streaked with dirt and fear, his hands still bound, one of Dante's men dragging him forward at gunpoint. He froze when he saw us, his eyes wide, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who'd promised he'd take care of me no matter what, who'd sworn he'd never let anyone hurt me. "Lena," he choked, his voice breaking. "We have to go now, please, he's dying." "I can't leave him," I said, though even as I said it, I knew how impossible those words were. The building was collapsing around us, the walls groaning under the strain of fire and gunfire, the air thick with dust that tasted like metal and loss. "Lena!" Liam shouted again, louder this time, stepping closer, his wrists bleeding where the rope had cut into his skin. "He'll die anyway if we stay. We have to move." But Dante's hand tightened on mine, faint, trembling, his strength fading by the second. "Go," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper now. "Get out. Take him. You can still have something after this." "I'm not leaving you," I said fiercely, shaking my head, tears blurring everything. He smiled again, softer this time, and there was something almost peaceful in it. Something that broke me even more because it looked like surrender. "You already saved me," he whispered. "You just don't know it." The ceiling above us cracked, concrete dust raining down like gray snow. Liam reached for me again, shouting something I couldn't hear, and the world blurred into noise and light and chaos. I wanted to hold on, to fight it, to keep him tethered to me, but Dante's hand slipped from my face, falling limply to the floor, his breath catching once, then fading into stillness so quiet it was almost cruel. For a moment, everything inside me stopped. The world tilted, the ground swaying beneath me as if gravity itself had broken, and I thought if I just kept my hand on his chest, if I just refused to let go, he might breathe again. But he didn't. He was gone. And the silence that followed was worse than any scream. Liam pulled me back, his arms wrapping around me as the fire roared closer. "Lena, we have to go," he yelled, dragging me to my feet. I didn't remember standing, didn't remember moving, only the sound of my own heartbeat and the ghost of Dante's voice echoing through the space he no longer filled. We stumbled out into the night as the factory behind us burned, the flames reaching for the sky like some furious god claiming its offering. The air outside was cold and sharp, but I couldn't feel it. I could still smell him on my skin, still feel the warmth of his hand fading from mine. Liam was crying, though I don't think he realized it. His hand, gripping mine as if afraid I'd vanish too. "I didn't mean for this," he kept saying over and over, his voice breaking. "I didn't mean for any of this." I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. We watched the building collapse, the roar of the fire swallowing the last of the night. and I thought of all the things Dante had been. The monster, the savior, the man who had taught me what it meant to be seen and destroyed in the same breath. And I wondered if this was what he'd wanted all along, an ending written in fire, the only kind of purity a man like him could ever have. The sirens came eventually, red and blue lights cutting through the smoke, men shouting, hands pulling us away from the wreckage, questions I couldn't hear or answer. They took Liam away first, their voices sharp, their faces cold, and I let them, because I couldn't fight anymore, not for him, not for anyone. When they asked who he was, the man in the fire, I told them I didn't know. Because how could I explain Dante Moretti in words that would make sense to anyone who hadn't been touched by his darkness, by his light? How could I tell them that he wasn't a hero? But he wasn't a villain either. That he was something else entirely. Something that lived in the space between love and ruin? Days passed, though I measured them only in silence. The house was gone, the men scattered, the world moving on as it always does, indifferent to the holes people leave behind. I buried him myself, quietly, in the hills outside the city, where the wind never stops moving, because he'd told me once that he didn't believe in heaven or hell, only in what people leave behind, and I wanted to leave him somewhere the world couldn't reach. Sometimes, at night, I still hear his voice. Not the words, but the tone, the low hum of it, steady, commanding, dangerous and tender all at once. And I wonder if that's what love really is in the end. Not salvation, not safety, but the echo of something you can't forget, even when it's gone. My brother lives now with the weight of what he did, and I live with the weight of what I lost. We don't talk about that night. We can't. There are some truths that can't survive the light. But sometimes, when the wind catches just right and the city glows gold in the distance, I think I see him there, in the shape of shadows moving through the fog, in the glint of dark glass under the sun, in the quiet that follows after pain. And I imagine him saying my name the way he used to, low and reverent, like a prayer. And maybe that's the cruelest thing about love. The way it doesn't end when the person does, the way it lingers like smoke in your lungs, impossible to breathe, impossible to let go. Because even now, long after the ashes have cooled, long after the fire has gone out, I still feel him in every heartbeat. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I swear I can still taste the gunpowder on the air and hear his voice whispering against my skin. You shouldn't have walked through my door.